And the second reading for today comes from the book of Luke, chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. Listen for God's word for you today. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where were they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth
And the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen.
So, into the first lesson that we read for today, there is a man who has been sick for 38 years. And Jesus comes to him and says, "Do you want to be made well?" Does the man ever answer that question? He doesn't answer the question. Instead, he makes excuses for why he has not been healed. "Well, for 38 years I've been trying to get in this water and nobody will help me." 38 years? That seems like a long time. Do we do this? Do we make excuses for why we can't get the healing that we need? I call you to just think about that for a moment. I think that change is hard for all of us. And there's more to it than that, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I think we do put up blocks, even to positive change. I want to give you 3 examples. 2 are from churches that I'm familiar with. One church was discovering, and this is pastored by a very good friend of mine, and it's like many of our churches, most of our churches, it's shrinking. It's becoming older, it's shrinking. And the reaction of the pastor was to say, what is costing us money is the building. It's the upkeep of the building, so let's try and we're down to 20 people. We could be a church without walls. We could meet in people's homes. We could meet at the local school. We could do this, and we could survive, and we could continue to do ministry, and we could thrive, because the thing that's costing us is the building. Well, after a lot of voting and conversation, the congregation decided they would rather close than meet somewhere else. Another congregation that another friend of mine was pastoring was in the process of merging with another congregation. Both of them were too far down in their membership. One had 15 members, the other had 30, and both of their buildings, again, were an issue. So they were in long conversation about, we could merge together. We could become one church, because as one church, we could actually afford the upkeep of one of these buildings. They were on the verge of making that decision when both congregations decided, no, that would be giving up who we are, and they both closed instead. This is common. Both of those churches were in Cleveland. Both happened within the span of 3 months. I want to give you one more example. As many of you know, I volunteered for a while on a hotline for battered and abused spouses. But I have to admit that the only people who called were women. And what we found was that even though these women's physical being was threatened, sometimes their very lives were threatened, they could not leave. their spouse. It's not that they had nowhere to go. We provided a shelter, a safe and hidden place where they would receive job training, therapy, counseling both for themselves and for their kids, where they would receive help getting homes. But they could not do it. People said, well, they were probably afraid of being pursued, but that wasn't what I found in listening. Other people would say, well, they love their spouses, and sometimes that's what they said. But sometimes their very children's lives were in danger, and they still found it very difficult to leave. Change is hard, but again, I think it's more than that. In the passage that we heard today from Luke, there were 10 who were lepers. And interestingly, the phrase that they use is have mercy on us, which actually we tend to think is a call for help. But when I did some study on this, it's actually the phrase that was used when people were asking for alms. So they were not asking for healing. They were asking for alms. And yet Jesus healed them, and as they went on their way, only one returned to give thanks. And we might say, well, why? Why, when they were healed, when they were made whole, did only one return to give thanks? And I think the answer is, again, that change is hard, but it's also more than that. I think at the deepest level, sometimes our issues start defining who we are. We start knowing ourselves as the person who had this tragedy, or the person who has this condition, or even the person just who is this. We do this to each other as well. I was in a public restroom recently, and there was a sign up that said, beware of purse snatchers. And I thought, okay, that's their whole identity according to this little sign. They are purse snatchers. They are not men and women who are stealing purses. They are not mothers and fathers who are desperate. They are not kids who don't know how to help themselves. They're purse snatchers. And if we can label them, if we can put them in this box, we can contain them. We know who they are. We do this with other people too. People who have no homes become bums or homeless people. Homeless people is a kinder term. People with addictions become addicts. Our youth become juvenile delinquents or thugs if they get into trouble. We have these labels, and we associate them with people. What's interesting is that what Jesus does, he doesn't do that. And it's really in stark contrast. And if you're reading it in the Greek, you would see this, but you're not. He doesn't refer to them as lepers. Everybody else does. But Jesus actually says people with leprosy, a man with a disability. He is very careful to not assign their whole identity to whatever this condition is. But like I said, I don't just think that we do this to each other. We also do it to ourselves. For the battered and abused women or men who cannot leave their spouses, I think it's about their identity. Who are they if they are no longer attached to this person? Who are you when your spouse dies? You suddenly change your identity. You're no longer Mr. or Mrs. or, you're no longer part of a partnership. You're now a widow or a widower. When you get divorced, every single form reminds you that you are no longer a married person. You are a divorced person. But those labels can start becoming all of who we are. How many of you have seen the movie Pleasantville? No? Okay, just a couple of you. It's a really good movie. I'll have to show it for one of these movie nights. Pleasantville is a movie in which everything starts out black and white. And everybody's happy, but everything is black and white. It's very one-dimensional. They have their routine, they go through their days, and everything's very pleasant, and everything's very marked, and everything's very scheduled until somebody starts adding color. And what we see as normal is threatening to everybody else. There's signs all over the place, avoid colored people. Because they have red now, and they have pink, and they have blue, and they've got flesh tones. And even though they're now living with passion and intensity and commitment, it's a change. It's not who we are, the people in the town keep saying. This is not who we are. My guess is that for the man who was healed after 38 years, that was going to be a struggle. Who is he now? His whole identity for 38 years has been wrapped up in, I can't get into the waters to get well. How do you start over? And for these 10 lepers, these 10 people with leprosy, only one finds themselves grateful for the new life, the new opportunity, the ability to start again and enter a life with wholeness. The other 9, well, there's a lot of reasons maybe why they don't return, but I think one of them has got to be confusion, loss of identity. Are they sure they're thankful? Because who are they now? The thing is, the people with leprosy didn't ask for healing, they asked for alms. And the man that Jesus healed didn't answer, yes, I want to be healed, and yet God does not leave us where we are. And I know that can be scary, but it's the truth. God wants wholeness for us. God wants new life for us. God wants healing and reconciliation and forgiveness for us. And so even when we aren't sure if that's what we want, God wants that for us, and God will push. Thanks be to God that we have a God who loves us more than we love ourselves. Enough to push us into change, but into new life. Because God wants that wholeness for us, even when we are afraid to embrace it. Thanks be to God. Amen.